Okay, so, story to start off. If you want to know some of the people that have hurt me the most, it is by far kids. It is always kids. Like, I try not to hang around kids a ton. I have a nephew, some nieces, I have some friends who have kids, and I like their kids. But beyond that, I try not to. And I have my education degree. I wanted to be a teacher, which means there's kids involved. But I also knew that there would never be enough money in the world for me to teach kindergarten or grade 1, even grade 2. I'd even say grade 3. There's never enough money. Because whenever a kid hurts me, it seems to happen a lot, it's usually like a physical pain or an emotional pain. And I have this ethical dilemma where I'm like, do I hurt them back? Because for a split second, I do think about it. And not to the point where the social workers in the room need to be concerned. It's not that far. But for example, one time a kid came up to me and he noticed I had birthmarks and freckles on my arm. And he said, I'm going to scratch them out. And I said, well, what do you mean? And so he dug his finger in and he tried to scratch it out and he got some blood. And for a split second, I was like, how do I get him back? And another time, this was my own fault looking back, but I had to take some candy away from a kid, which, again, my own fault. So he bit me, and he bit my fingers, and I had, bite marks in my fingers for hours after that. And as soon as he bit me, I remember looking at him and being like, where do I bite him back? Which, again, is awful. And I have a lot of these stories. One time I was sitting down on the ground, and my legs were crossed, and this little girl came over, didn't really know her, and she sat down on my lap. I thought, oh, this is nice. And then she farted, the biggest fart, and then she got up and left. And I was like, 1, how do I get back at you? And 2, I feel like I need to wash my pants. That's how bad it was. But recently, it was more of an emotional pain that I suffered. I was talking to my nephew. He's going to be 5 next week. And we were FaceTiming, and he was telling me he was super excited. He had a big smile on his face, lots of joy, talking about his birthday and the presents he was going to get. And I said, what about your party? I'm like, am I invited to your party? And the joy, the smile left his face, and he looked me dead in the eye, and he said, we'll see. And I was like, right? I felt like he was Regina George from the Mean Girls, and I was Lindsay Lohan. How does a 5-year-old kid make me resonate with Lindsay Lohan? I was like, well, we'll see what you get, kid. It's going to be a rough birthday. So if you are someone here who you're surrounded by kids, or maybe you're a father, happy Father's Day, you are the real heroes. Because kids, they're something else. That's all I can say. But this month, we've been going through a brand new series called This is Awkward. We've been talking about relationships in our lives that they're tough. They're more difficult. That first week, we talked about the relationship with yourself. Second week, the relationship with your parents. And tonight, I want to talk to you about relationships with people who have hurt you. So it's going to be really light. It's going to be really fun. But if I were to ask every single person in this room, when was the last time that someone hurt you? Or what that looked like when it was. Some of you might be like, oh yeah, it was this morning. It was an hour ago. It's going to be different for every single person. Because feeling pain or hurt, it's universal. Even if it comes from a 5-year-old kid, right? And it can look different for every person. What might hurt someone won't hurt the next person. For example, I know some people who get very offended when you spell their names wrong, their name wrong. It's okay, wow, calm down. Other times, if you're that person who gets offended when you let someone into your lane in traffic and they don't apologize, which is fair. You are annoying if that's you. You personally annoy me. You offend me. It could also be that person who insists on having pineapple on their pizza because they think it belongs there, which it does. If that hurts you, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. It does belong there. It's wonderful. We're very split on that. Or, of course, it could be a lot more serious. It could be those times when someone lies right to your face, someone lies about you, they gossip about you. When someone believes the worst in you, that one sucks. When someone cheats on you, betrays you, ignores you, overlooks you, the list could go on. And we've almost turned hurting each other into a sport, I think. Like it starts when we're young, and the older we get, we just get better at it. Like we just know how to hurt each other better, which we don't really think about, but it's true. Because we have this constant choice we're going to face every single day of, do I hurt them back? Do I bite the kid back? Because sometimes you kind of want to. Like you want them to feel the pain that they've caused you. At least like give them a taste of their own medicine. Because once you do, then they'll get it. Like then they'll realize, they'll understand, they'll apologize, they'll change, right? Like that's how we're going to rationalize it. Or like, do you step back, you're the bigger person, rise above all that jazz that your mother taught you? Like, I don't think I need to explain the process of being hurt. I think we get that part. That part of the conversation is clear. But the conversation that needs to keep happening, basically daily, it feels like, is our reaction to that pain. Our reaction to the hurt that we feel caused by others. Like, how do we navigate and move forward in those relationships with people who have really hurt us? Because I think for a lot of us, I think our go-tos would be either like you hide away, you shut people out, you make rules like not to trust people. My personal favorite is just to avoid. But I think the most attractive one, the most appealing one by far, is revenge. Like revenge sounds so good. Like there's a reason why people make movies about it. Because like getting revenge, it lets them, again, see and feel and experience some of the pain that they caused you. Because that pain, it kind of starts a fire inside of you, right? Like you feel the injustice of it, and you want to fight fire with fire. So revenge, it feels like second nature. It comes naturally to us. It doesn't take much for us to get there. There is another way, but of course no one likes it. In the book of Matthew, in chapter 18, it says this. Then Peter came to him and asked, "Lord, how often shall I forgive someone who sins against me? 7 times?" "No, not 7 times," Jesus replied, "but 70 times 7. Like, no one likes the idea of forgiveness. Really, we don't. Like, even Peter, who's one of the disciples of Jesus, even he thought he was being generous here. He's like, okay, I'll forgive someone 7 times. That seems enough. But then his reply was quite shocking. It's kind of annoying too. And he's like, no, 70 times 7. Basically, don't keep count. Just keep forgiving. But like forgiveness, it holds such a weight with it. Like when I knew that I'd be speaking on forgiveness tonight, honestly, like I let out a bit of a sigh. Not because I didn't want to speak on it, but because I felt the weight of it. I already felt challenged of it in my own life. I already knew there was baggage I had to work through before I had any right to come here and talk to you about it. So I'm definitely coming to you as someone not who has mastered this, far from it, but as someone who gets it. It's hard. So nothing about this is easy. And just as much as it is a guarantee that we're going to face that pain and hurt by other people in our life, it's a guarantee. We are then faced with the equally difficult task of choosing to forgive or not. Every single day, it seems like, because forgiveness, it's never like a one-time thing. It's always that gnawing voice in your head. Should you forgive? But choosing to respond to the pain that someone causes you by forgiving them, I think is equally, if not more, painful. There's this quote by an author. Her name's Brené Brown. She says this: "Forgiveness is so difficult because it involves death and grief." I don't want to stand here and assume that I can understand like the pain you guys are going through, because I know for a lot of you, you have some serious stuff you're going through. Like it's painful and it's hard. I don't want to diminish the reality of that pain or make it seem small, because it's not. But Jesus actually, he does have a lot to say about this. After, like the verse we were just reading in Matthew, after Peter asked Jesus how many times to forgive, Jesus, he actually goes on to tell a parable, like a story of what this looks like in our life. So I'm just going to sum up some parts, and you'll see some verses on the screen. But first he says, "Therefore, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who decided to bring his accounts up to date with servants who had borrowed money from him. In the process, one of his debtors was brought in who owed him millions, like millions of dollars. He could not pay, so his master ordered that he be sold, along with his wife, his kids, everything he owned, so that he could pay the debt." And then verse 26 says, "But the man fell down before his master and begged him, 'Please be patient with me, and I will pay it.' Then his master was filled with pity for him, and he released him and forgave his debt. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him, begged for a little more time. He said, 'Be patient with me, I will pay it,' he pleaded. But his creditor would not wait. He had the man arrested, put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. When some of the other servants saw this, they were very upset. So they went to the king, told him everything that had happened. The king then called the man in he had forgiven and said, 'You evil servant. I forgave you that tremendous debt because you pleaded with me. Shouldn't you have mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you?' Then the angry king sent the man to prison to be tortured until he had paid his entire debt. That is what my heavenly Father will do to you if you refuse to forgive your brothers and sisters from the heart." This is tough. Like, it's talking about torture for not showing mercy. This is not something you really want to read in the Bible. Like, it's blunt, it's extreme, and Jesus, he doesn't give another option here. He makes it very clear of what he's asking. Basically, if we want call ourselves Jesus followers, then we have to wrestle with this. There's no other way out here. Even again in Matthew, same book of the Bible, in chapter 6, he says, "If you do not forgive others, God will not forgive you." He makes it really clear. And neither of these passages, just to clarify, they're not meant to be a threat. They're not meant to threaten us. But it's meant to reiterate what is said again in Matthew chapter 7 later on, which basically says you'll be judged and forgiven to the same extent that you judge and forgive. Like, you'll sow what you reap. So the hard part of forgiveness, though, like, it is not fair. It does not feel just. Like, Jesus, he makes it seem black and white, but it does not feel black and white when someone hurts you so badly that you don't know if you can come back from it. Like, you don't know if you can shake it off or let it go. Like, when someone causes you or someone close to you so much pain that you want to see them in just as much pain, if not more. And like, maybe you don't want to see them die. We're not going to go that far. But if they're like walk past a fire, like a campfire, and fall in just for a couple seconds, you would be okay with that. Like, if they were permanently lose an eyebrow, like, you would just feel a little bit of relief, right? A little bit of joy. Be like, yeah, okay. Like, forgiveness never feels black and white because it's not fair. It's rarely easy. But I think that's why Jesus, he talks so bluntly about this. Like, he knows it's not easy. So he doesn't mix his words up here. He doesn't beat around the bush. He makes it very clear. If you want to be my follower, I'm asking you to forgive. So maybe that's why the word or the concept of forgiveness is actually brought up over 140 times in the Bible. It's a big deal. It's never a one and done type thing, ever. And I'm currently navigating this in my own life. Like, I have found myself in situations where the idea of forgiveness did not seem like an option. Definitely not an appealing one. And even though I knew in my head and I knew what I was supposed to do, I had a very hard time reconciling what I knew with what I was called to do. Because truthfully, like I had no interest in following through and forgiving that person. No interest. Like the pain often overruled what I knew. And I was fully aware, like I said, I was fully aware that I knew God would only forgive me to the same extent that I would forgive someone else. And if that isn't a good enough reason, I don't know what is. But there were some days where I was like, it doesn't feel like it's good enough. I don't want to admit that. Like, I'm not proud of that, that's for sure. But I remember thinking, like, God, what you're asking me to do here, it's too much. Hurts too much. I don't think it's a good enough reason. Like, have you ever been there? Or have you been in a place where you thought you made that conscious decision to forgive someone, and then you see them again? You see them again, or you think of them even, or you think of what happened in the situation, and you feel like you've been hit by a truck all over again, and you're right back to where you started. Like, what then? Whether you believe in God or not, like, give me one good reason to forgive. Forgiveness will bring freedom. When someone hurts you, there's this fire that starts within you. Like, this fire can become all-consuming, where all you can think about is the hurt that was done to you and ways to get back at them. Like, maybe you go over the incident in your head, like it is alive, and it is at the front of your head. You think of it when you wake up, you think of it when you go to bed, and you think about what you would do or yell or say next time, and you secretly hope for the chance just to do it or say it. And again, our immediate reaction, it feels natural for revenge. Like, how can I get them back? Like, you want to let that fire grow until it consumes you so much that it overtakes you. Because it will feel good. Like, withholding forgiveness often feels right. It feels satisfying. Like, a lack of forgiveness, it will let that fire burn longer, it'll let it get bigger and brighter, and it'll keep you tied to that person. Even if you do choose to cut that person out of your life, but you have not done the work to first forgive them, that fire is still there. You just turned your back on it. Like, it's still there waiting for you. You can still feel the heat of it. You're not free of it. You may even believe the lie that this fire you have, it's only directed at the one person, right? Like, it's not going to affect the rest of your life. It's not going to affect your other relationships. But what do fires do? They spread. They're hard to control. They give off sparks. So of course it's going to affect the rest of your life. It's going to affect the rest of your relationships. It's going to affect how you make decisions, if you trust people, if you want to move forward, whether or not you're going to open up again. Like, all of this will end up making you feel very stuck, trapped. You might feel like a victim, maybe even become more self-absorbed. You'll become angry and bitter and resentful. And the person on the other end, yeah, they may be suffering from your lack of forgiveness, or they may have no idea. You think you're punishing them in your head, but in reality, you're just punishing yourself. It's like, ultimately, a lack of forgiveness, it will disrupt the peace you have, definitely with yourself, always with others, and most of all with God. Choosing to forgive, that will do the opposite. Forgiveness will actually douse that fire out completely. You may have to douse it out daily, sometimes hourly, it feels like. But it means that you're making the daily decision to live free of it. You're not going to be defined by it. You're no longer chained to that pain or chained to the person who hurt you. You're not going to go over it and over it in your head. That means that maybe you can take a step forward, that you can try to move on, that you can find a sense of peace. Maybe you can sleep again. Maybe it's not the first thing you think of when you wake up. Maybe you can make a plan, move forward. Maybe even your physical health would get better. You'll learn to love yourself. You'll learn to love others. Like that is what forgiveness will bring you. Ultimately, it will bring you hope. Forgiveness will bring you such freedom. There's this quote by this pastor named Andy Stanley, and he says this: "In the shadow of my hurt, forgiveness felt like a decision to reward my enemy. But in the shadow of the cross, forgiveness is merely a gift from one undeserving soul to another." Like when Jesus was being nailed to the cross, he had every reason and then some to get revenge. Like what happened to him was brutal. And the part that we can't skip over, the part that always will stop me in my tracks, is realizing that he did not wait for a second to forgive us. Like he was literally there dying in front of these people while they were laughing at him, they were mocking him, they were like gambling over his belongings. And even then, he did not wait to see the look of guilt. He didn't wait for them to apologize first. None of it. He didn't wait. Like he made that first move. And because of that, he asks us to actually do the same. Because I think he knows what will happen if we don't. Like if we don't, he knows we're going to get lost in this like deep, dark pit of our own anger, our own resentment, our hopelessness, our pain, all of that. That's what we're going to get lost in. But he also knows that the only way out of that pit, the only thing that will bring relief to that pain that we're feeling, is forgiveness. And I get it. That's hard to believe. Sometimes I don't want to believe that or even trust it. But forgiveness is the one thing that will bring you that freedom and that hope that you need again. If you remember, there was a quote I said earlier on by the author Brené Brown. There's actually a second part to it. And she says this: "Forgiveness is so difficult because it involves death and grief. But to be forgiven is to be loved. Choosing not to forgive is to allow evil to spread." There's another pastor, his name is Timothy Keller, and he says this about feeling hurt and pain. He says, "Evil has been done to you, yes. But when you try to get payment through revenge, the evil does not disappear. Instead, it spreads. And it spreads most tragically of all into you and your own character." Like, even if you're here and you are, thankfully, like you're not currently in this awkward situation, this awkward relationship with someone who has really hurt you, there may still just be like those small hurts or pains from people close to you, right? Like maybe someone said something to you or did something to you, but it was small and it was just the one time. It wasn't that big of a deal, so it hasn't really tripped you up. That's hard to think of that as evil being done to you. But I still want to challenge you. Like, have you forgiven them? Because even if it was just a small thing or just that one time, that is all it takes sometimes for that fire inside of you to grow. It doesn't take much. So ask yourself, like, have you forgiven them? Like, do you need to follow up? And it could just be a simple conversation to be like, "Hey, I don't think you meant to hurt me, but it actually kind of stung when you said this or you did this." Because the thing is, if you can't forgive in the small or in that one thing, how will you ever learn to forgive in the big or in the many? Because just letting it go without forgiveness, it doesn't work. Walking away without forgiveness won't last. But forgiveness is the one thing that will bring freedom, and it's a choice we have to make daily, it feels like. But how? How on earth are we supposed to do this? Or how are you supposed to know when you have forgiven someone? The first thing I think is so important that we can't skip over is that forgiveness is a process. Like, as much as Jesus made it clear that we need to forgive, this does not mean he wants to do it without thought or feeling. Like, it will probably not happen overnight. Even if it's a very old wound or it's a fresh one, you'll likely need to grieve first. It's not going to be easy, but that means you have to face the damage of what was done. You need to grieve over what was lost. because something was lost. It could be that relationship, it could be that promotion, or that plan you had, or something you were hoping for. Even if that person, you didn't lose that person who hurt you, they're still in your life, the relationship has changed. You may need to grieve over that, figure out what it will look like to repair it. Like in my own life, this took a long time sometimes. It would take weeks, sometimes even months, because there was so much to work through and process. And some days, it felt like it was one step forward and 2 steps back. So if you were in that place where you need to grieve, give yourself that space. And realize grieving does not mean that you sleep it off or you just watch Netflix. Sometimes, but not all the time. Like that may mean that you need to talk to a trusted friend, or better yet, a counselor. Like get help in the small things before it becomes big. Don't feel like you have to justify getting help for something small. It's a lot harder when you wait and it becomes a lot bigger. So talk to a counselor, get prayer, journal your way through it, go for a walk, go for a bike ride, whatever it may be, just to get out and think it through. Give yourself that freedom and that space. Because first thing, forgiveness, it's a process. Second thing, realize that forgiveness, it often needs to be granted before it will ever be felt. If you wait for the day that you feel like you can forgive, that day may never come in reality. Forgiveness is an act of the will, and the will can function regardless of the temperature of the heart. That was said by this incredible woman. Her name's Corrie ten Boom, and she, if you never heard of her, her and her family, they actually helped hide a lot of Jews from the Nazis in the Second World War. And her and her family were eventually caught, and her sister and her were sent to a concentration camp where she saw her sister die. And there was one soldier in particular who was especially brutal to her sister. And there were years later when, after she was released, she actually sought out those soldiers, specifically the one that was so harsh to her sister. And she sought them out in order to talk to them and then forgive them. I don't know how someone does that, honestly. But if she can go through all of that and somehow still seek someone else out so that she can forgive them, like maybe that means you and I can do the same. And again, I in no way want to diminish or make light of what you've gone through. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But even what Corrie did, even what she did, seems small or pales in comparison to what Christ did for us on the cross. Like, we can't be indifferent towards that or apathetic. So granting someone forgiveness, it means that you promise not to bring up that wrong to them or to other people or even to yourself. It means you don't dwell on it. You don't go over it in your head over and over, adding fuel to that fire. Like, you douse that fire out daily. So forgiveness, it needs to be granted before it is felt. Third thing, realize how forgiveness is possible. Like, realize the reality of God's massive and incredibly costly gift to us of forgiveness through Jesus on the cross. Like, if we're not stopping to realize that, to realize the debt that he canceled on our behalf, we will never have that same perspective towards someone else who owes us a debt. It won't work. So ask yourself, what have you been forgiven for? It may look very different than the situation that you find yourself in, but each of us have been forgiven an incredible amount by the people around us, but also by God. Like, no one's blameless. So remember how forgiveness is possible in the first place. Fourth thing, you need to forgive before you try to be reconciled. These things are actually very different. Forgiveness involves one person. Reconciliation involves two. If the person who hurt you, if they don't want to admit it, if they don't want to confess or take ownership, that sucks and that's hard. But that doesn't mean you can't take those steps to forgive them. Reconciliation, on the other hand, that requires two people. That means both parties are willing to figure out what happened, what went wrong, to humble themselves, to admit what they did, and then work to change. Because that's a part of reconciliation. You can't just forgive someone and then go back to the way it was. Change has to be made. Like boundaries may need to be set. Trust will probably have to be eventually gained again. That will take time. But sometimes also realize it is not healthy to reconcile. Like if there's any form of abuse or unhealthy patterns, reconciliation very likely may not be an option, nor should it be. So if you need help with that, again, you need to talk to someone. Don't figure this out by yourself. Forgiveness must come before reconciliation. And the fifth and the final thing is arriving at a place when you are ready to risk again. Every single relationship requires risk in any form. That's what it is with people. So it's a good sign when you are ready to risk that you have grown, you've worked through this. If you find yourself in a place where you are hurt again by someone, because it's going to happen when you're with people, you're going to get hurt, and your immediate reaction is to shut down, to run away, to lash out, or just to assume the worst in people, that's a good sign that you have not worked through it. You've not forgiven someone. You've not figured it out with yourself, with the people involved, or with God. That should be a red flag for you. So you may have to go back, figure out what it looks like, what happened and why. Because like I said earlier, letting it go and just walking away, it doesn't work. It's not going to last. So put that work in before you're ready to risk again. You'll know that you are on the path to forgiveness when you want that other person to be healthy, to be whole, and if possible, to reconcile themselves with Christ. Now maybe you're here, maybe you're the one that caused pain or hurt for someone else. It was your words, it was your actions who hurt someone. This message, it's not meant to single you out or make you feel ashamed, not in the least, because every single one of us is guilty of this at one point or another. Like we all need to be held accountable. So the process, it may be similar for you actually. Like you may need to grieve over what happened, over what was lost. There likely will be consequences that you need to face. Just don't avoid them. That makes it worse. It doesn't mean that you are exempt from forgiveness or the possibility of reconciliation, but give that person the space, the time to think it through. Even you yourself, take that time, talk to a trusted friend. Better yet, see a counselor, especially if there's like those unhealthy habits that you may not be aware of. But put your own work in. Like be patient and intentional with your time rather than just waiting for the other person to figure it out while you wait. Be intentional with your own time. There's so much to cover on forgiveness. Like none of this is straightforward or easy. But if I could leave you with one last thought. Like remember that we are all desperately in need of forgiveness. Desperately, every single one of us. Like none of us are exempt. But the good news, like God is ready. He is waiting to forgive us if we would go to him. Like he died and made the biggest sacrifice possible to make you and me free. So don't deny yourself that freedom by choosing not to forgive. Because honestly, guys, forgiveness really is that only thing that will bring that freedom to your life and that hope. Now, if you guys are struggling with this, if it's just struck a chord and you're having a hard time or you need more information even on what this means, we want to help you guys. And you can actually text the word NEXT, 555-888. You'll get a link for some information. Check out option talk to a pastor. But it's all in your court. We're not going to corner you. But take that step if you need to. Let's pray. God, thank you that we can be honest and open about this, that we don't have to hide behind what we've done or what's been done to us. We know that you see the full picture. You know that you see and understand just how much hurt some of us are going through, that it's not something that will just go away when we snap our fingers or wish it away, God. So I pray that you would give each person in the room just the courage the courage to face what they're going through, the courage to take those steps, and maybe to find that reconciliation or just choose forgiveness, God. None of this will be easy, but we know and we can trust that you'll be with us every step of the way, that we will never be abandoned by you in this, God. So we ask for your help in this. We know that we can trust you in this. So we ask this in your name. Amen. Thanks, guys. Well, if you still have anger and revenge, we have axe throwing. So go have fun with that. Thanks, guys.